Hello and welcome to the Illuminating Immunity Virtual Summit, Light and Photobiomodulation versus COVID-19. My guests today are Dr. Marvin Berman. He's a PhD from Temple University. He's the founder and president of Quiet Mind Foundation. And we have Sarah Turner, master's in neuroscience. She's a biohacker and a researcher for red light therapy. I'll welcome you to the summit. Thank you for attending.
Thanks for having us.
So the concept that we're going to be looking at today, you got going on this, Marvin. How did you get, integrated to say light, COVID? What was your impetus? What was your motivation that you wanted to talk about this?
Well, initially it was to talk about research on the use of photobiomodulation in a generic sense, because I've been doing research and was aware of some of the action that was going on in the field, but we were particularly focused on dementia, and that's how it was for me. We were going to talk about it in terms of generic, how can you use photobiomodulation to treat COVID? And then I got COVID-19 and was down for about 3 weeks in early April, and was fortunate enough to have infrared transcranial devices available to me so that I was able to treat myself at home. And I think that in large measure, that's what helped me stay out of the hospital and decrease the inflammation in my lungs that was starting to build up. And I was able to use the Cognito light, which I had, and the V light, which I had, and another laser device, along with antibacterial. And that really helped me through the worst part of it. So now it's kind of the generic, but also the specific.
Yep. About
how it really can be helpful. And I have my own direct experience now that I'm COVID negative and I'm donating plasma. I'm a much happier guy.
I agree with you. And you were one of the first ones that were percolating about, hey, when we start to see the research and we say they're talking about these different mechanisms of how the disease is affecting us, you're one of the first guys that started to percolate to say, hey, I think we have a mechanism connection here. I think it's all working together. Am I correct?
Right. Well, I was very lucky, and you've got Paul Chazot giving a talk on the summit as well. And I am very lucky to have had Paul as a colleague for the last 10 to 12 years, working on learning the ins and outs of photobiomodulation from him at the bench science level, and then being able to work on making the translation to working with patients with dementia and ALS and Parkinson's with Gordon Dougal in the UK. That's really how it happened. I mean, I looked at what was going on in the COVID world, and then I called Paul and said, this sounds oddly familiar to some of the things we've had conversations about over the years. And that's when Paul pulled out some of his old research, and he delivered it on the other summit a couple of weeks ago. And one thing led to another, and we thought, gee, this really should be delved into more specifically about how we really can use COVID, how we can use the photobiomodulation to deal with COVID. And I know Paul made a very strong argument in his lecture, and I certainly recommend everybody, make a point of listening to what he has to say.
I think that he covered the mechanisms in a great way.
He really did.
And I think that when we circle back and say, wait a minute, we looked at the brain and we looked at neurodegeneration a couple of weeks back, and the problem is someone has got to make this connection between brain and the viral infection, because now we see that, loss of smell is the first thing, that starts to go. And we know that that's one of the first signs of brain damage, neurodegeneration. And then we see that the APO4 gene is a risk factor for which part of it? The neurodegenerative part of it or the death? Sarah, you looked at that, didn't you?
Yeah, I think it is. You have more severity of disease if you have just one of the alleles, and even more if you have two.
So the connection of your work for the last decade in neurodegenerative diseases and photobiomodulation kind of is, you knew that something was, there was a connection of some sort, and then there it is revealed, to that as the brain is starting to have trouble, these things are going to be more evident. Is that what you found, Marvin?
Oh, yeah. And we certainly saw that in the research that we're doing now on Alzheimer's with the Baylor Research Institute that's connected with Texas A&M School of Medicine and in their neurosurgery department. And we're doing a study and seeing how people with dementia have very specific reactions to the light. And we're seeing also that their response has to do in part with lack of blood flow and inflammation. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a strong connection there with people who have the alleles and the APOE4 having more complications with cerebral perfusion.
Well, wow.
And so
I think that perhaps in the future when we're doing our recruiting for our studies, maybe we have to look at if they are COVID positive or COVID negative, or if they have the immunity, because that could kind of be one more thing that we're looking at. Because, how does the brain get better? We haven't really looked at all the, maybe in our background and our demographics, we haven't looked at all the viral loads that they may have. We haven't checked that because we know mold, the mold can give you the brain damage. We know that the leaky blood-brain barrier can give you the brain damage, so things from the nose and the mouth can get in there. So that's possibly, another complicating factor or something when we're doing our neurodegenerative research type of thing to look at. Anything you want to pat around there, or Sarah, or are you ready for the slides?
No, we can start. I just can say another thing that they're finding with COVID is delirium, isn't it? It's one of the symptoms that they're finding.
And Paul's talk about precipitating disorders at the pharmacological level. He talked a lot about how he sees the connection to delirium, and that the photobiomodulation model that he's been working on using the 1068, the pulsed 1068, really did have a positive effect on delirium.
I don't think he covered that. So that's an important point. And that's an important point, that the psychosis, delirium is a British word, really. It's
right.
Hallucinations is the American word for that.
Right.
So that's a factor that really hasn't really been brought to light, that people start to lose their mind.
Well, it's only starting. I mean, people are only starting to get aware and take seriously the idea that many, if not all, neuropsychiatric disorders have a neuroinflammatory component that may even be causal, and that the gut-brain connection really has to be taken much more seriously in terms of understanding psychiatric disorders and then treatment. And here in Philadelphia, we've got the probably the worst Lyme vector in the United States. And Lyme disease and the co-infections. And so we're now realizing that Lyme disease can mimic any diagnosis in the DSM-5.
Yeah.
So these things have to be taken seriously, yes.
Good call. So let's go to the slides. Shine a light on me using red and infrared light for COVID-19. go ahead.
Okay, so I think probably you've kind of covered a lot about what COVID-19 is, and we've heard so much. Everybody's kind of now totally in tune with what it is, but just to state that it's a severe acute respiratory syndrome of a coronavirus type 2, and it's a single-stranded positive sense RNA virus. So there are several things that are interesting about it, are interesting and different about COVID-19. Of course, it's a novel virus, but this I've taken off of a BBC article, that there are a lot of baffling things about the virus. And so I've picked out some of the things here which maybe are more interesting if you're looking at it from the point of view of how we can address that with light. So one of the main things is the cleavage site for furin enzymes, and I know Marvin's going to talk a bit about that. And also what was interesting to me is this whole thing about how it's to do with oxidation, and how actually the virus seems to knock iron out of hemoglobin. And so you have this lack of oxygen. And a lot of people are kind of reporting that the symptoms are more like altitude sickness. So again, that kind of brings up how do we treat that differently to other viruses? And of course, the main thing is the development of this respiratory failure. That's the kind of progression of the illness. Marvin, I don't know if you want to jump in there and talk a little bit about the furin enzymes.
Only that the furin seems to support the development of you know what? Let me get to it later.
Yeah.
So talk about this iron knocked out of the hemoglobin. So we have oxygen that's going to be transferred back and forth with the hemoglobin, but if you lose the iron, you can't transport the oxygen at all. You can't carry it. Is that it?
Yeah, that's one of the theories that seems to happen, is that you have this, it's because it's taking the iron out of the hemoglobin, you're totally affecting the transport of the oxygen and the whole knock-on effect that has.
Think about the oxidative stress of iron free flowing in your body. I mean, that's the true oxidative stress. Iron rusts.
Yep.
Yes. And it damages the capillaries and all kinds of things too. So you have that added on top for sure. You have this dissociated iron. And there's a lot of stuff about methemoglobin. You have this different form of hemoglobin that transports oxygen differently. And I think really the deoxygenated blood is also more vulnerable to the viral attacks, which is...
It loses its defense system. One of the things is it can kind of blast the peroxide burst, perhaps. But I would suggest that you watch Frank Coco's talk on the blood and his interactions, because he's got some. This is right up. It's very much dovetails with that. So thank you. Go forward. Go ahead if you're ready.
I think the only thing to add about the furin at this point is that it supports the capacity of the virus to get into the cell, and that it's a key player in that infectivity factor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. And so I think one of the other things that we're looking at is that there are no really suitable drugs that can be used to cure or even to treat the virus at the moment. So the commonly used antiviral drugs are not effective in the case of this particular coronavirus. So obviously that's why we're kind of all talking and trying to put our heads together, but really this kind of opens the door for looking at these technologies which were maybe once called alternative but are certainly becoming more mainstream, and some of the things that we want to talk about, like photobiomodulation. And because you have this effect with the hemoglobin and the oxygen, people are looking at hyperbaric oxygen therapies in hyperbaric chambers, ozone therapy, and there are lots of functional medicine doctors who are getting some amazing results with high-dose Vit C, vitamin D, methylene blue, which is interesting that really works, because that kind of has a similar effect as photobiomodulation in that it's a donor of oxygen and electrons. So, you know, if that's working, then it kind of adds some more weight behind looking at red light as an alternative therapy too. Also glutathione and zinc, NAC. So there's quite a few alternative therapies that are being looked at that are showing some great results. And I know we want to kind of focus on the photobiomodulation side.
And I think that the idea that antibacterials medications were not going to be helpful was very much not the case with me, where I took about 5 doses of clarithromycin and it significantly improved my ability to breathe and my overall level of fatigue within a couple of days. So I think that the idea that antibacterials are not going to have much of an effect in a viral environment is something that really needs to be looked at more seriously and critically.
Very good point. And I will direct you to Lisa Laxo's talk, because she reviewed Chichuku's paper, and what they proposed was that the antibacterial effects of blue light and even maybe our red and infrared light were supportive care, because secondary infections and the vulnerability of the immune system to pneumonia that then would lead to the sepsis would be a complementary type of program. So
well, and we've seen, yeah, I agree with you. And I've read reports now from 2 clinics in California where they were treating people with chronic Lyme disease, and these people were exposed but did not come down with the virus, and they had absolutely no cases of COVID amongst all of their patients in the clinic who were undergoing intensive antibacterial and antibiotic treatment.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's, I mean, what we're saying is it's you know, it's whatever it's working with the immune system seems to be a good thing. Let's put it that way.
Right. And that's been going on for a long time, and especially with photobiomodulation, you know, it's not like we're talking about something new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think we're about 5,000 years into this idea.
That's right. And that's why we've got this slide, you know, heliotherapy. You know, this is a new discovery, looking at light to treat these kinds of infections. And the Nobel Prize was given to Niels Finsen, I believe, like back in 1908, for discovering red light and also UV light for different kinds of bacteria and viruses, going right up to the last kind of viral epidemic we had with the flu epidemic, where, you know, they were treating people by using sunlight, you know, putting people outside. Let's say maybe using something like methylene blue and putting them outside to activate it, or maybe just, you know, having your patients outside to get the healing light. So this is a nice quote from the health department at the time, that the sunlight therapy was the most valuable factor in reducing mortality, decreasing fatality from 40 to 13%. So it's not insignificant, you know, the effect of this healing light. Okay, so we can talk a bit about devices. Marvin, these are your lovely devices.
The first couple of devices are ones that I've been working with for a while. The one on the far left is the Cognitolite, which uses the 1068 to 1075 nanometer pulsed infrared. And we've been using it primarily to increase blood flow and decrease inflammation. And what we're finding is that it has a very rapid effect in terms of improving people's cognitive functioning. And we believe that it certainly has to do with the improvement in blood flow and also reducing the inflammatory response. So that led us to start thinking about how that same technology could be deployed, but in a different format. And so the device in the middle is a prototype design that Dr. Dougal is working up to use on someone's chest. And it has the ability to curve around either the chest, the back, or the sides. and it will deliver a continuous and pulsed array of light when we can then see how well the light can penetrate. We're going to use different power to see how much we need to use exactly to get in as deep enough to make an effect. But I think that we'll be able to see significant improvement with that, either completely around the person in, say, the ICU, or people at home could use it to just work on improving their functioning after they've gone through the acute phase and want to do something to help rehabilitate their functioning post-infection. The V-Light is a 810 nanometer device that also can be pulsed at 10 or 40 hertz. There are other technologies that are now working on being able to control the pulse rate more specifically, and one company that's doing that is called Neurofield, and they're using it along with their pulsed electromagnetic field technology so that their software will control the light pulse rate from 0 to 10,000 pulses per second. But we don't know exactly how that's going to work, and we're going to try and see how the light pulsing can affect change in inflammation using the V-Light. I think that whole body exposure may also be important, and there was a slide before showing a bed, and I think we're going to see what the NovaThor bed can do in terms of treating people with the in the post-infection phase.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, you've got the charger, the flex beam to look at. And
Yeah,
the charger.
yeah. I mean, this is not currently a device that's used in research, but we've got it here just to show the capability of what we could do. This is a device that has red and near infrared, but it's flexible, and you can see that it can kind of be placed over the chest, or you can have multiple ones over multiple areas. And this can be programmed really with whatever wavelength and frequency is found to be most effective. But for the current device, you know, it's got red and near infrared, so you can set that and set the different ratios. So hope, you know, it would be nice for a device like this to be used in some kind of research, because it is so convenient and easy to use for that purpose. This is FlexBeam, but this is a recharge product.
I think it's important that what Sarah and I are aligned around is this idea of safe, reliable, home-based, self-administered type of technology, so that this is a very scalable, not terribly expensive technology that people all over the world can then make use of.
I would suggest that, you know, when you look at the products that are out there, you know, my flexible pad is, you know, red and infrared, and it goes right on the body, and I use it all the time, and it goes right on your chest. It wraps. It's very soft. It's neoprene, and you know, it's very inexpensive, and you could put it anywhere. You know.
That's right.
It's very positive, and there's new intranasal devices and stuff. So I mean, the point is, get a pad or a product and put the light on you, because remember, as Lou Lin pointed out, if you do have the COVID, if you get sick, you can't go to the hospital. Until you're really almost sick, you can self-quarantine, and then you can treat yourself at home, right? And that's what he's looking at in his study. What's the difference between people who just self-isolate, how quick do they feel better, versus people that are using a photobiomodulation, how quick do they feel better, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think
I'm the example of somebody who self-quarantined and then treated themselves and didn't have to go to the hospital.
And I think
so. I mean, I'm an N of one that supports the hypothesis.
Same point. Same point as me. I mean, I most surely was affected because didn't get tested.
Oh,
but,
wow.
But you know, just really didn't even didn't even really reduce my activity that much, but I, could tell that there was some, changes in my body and things that they were looking at. And, I'm pretty good at monitoring myself. So really, I don't know what I'm going to be tested, but it's definitely, photobiomodulation is good for recovery. Let's just put it that way.
Well, and you're considerably younger than I am. I'm 69. So I had the age risk factor, looking at me. And then when my temperature hit 103 and wouldn't go down, and I started having trouble breathing and, thought, oh, this is not good. But I saw that, I could really do something for myself in very short order with the helmet.
Remember, I'm the one that sort of kind of said, hey, man, you're getting sick. I said, maybe you should go get tested. And he's like, no. And I'm like, and I sent him to think about Philadelphia and the Spanish flu and how they had He's like, oh, okay, maybe okay. So God bless you. Go on, Sarah. Go to the next one.
Oh, well, I wanted to put this one in because I thought that it was important to see that the thymus as a modulator of hormone activity, that we know that the thymus begins to diminish over the age span, and that it may be important to try and use photobiomodulation to prevent thymic involution, because there is a way that it can help with melatonin synthesis. And so I thought that would be really helpful, especially since the stimulation can happen through the bone marrow stem cells, and that can really help regenerate the thymus. And I thought that photobiomodulation influencing thymic involution could be a significant boost to immune functioning, especially in people in that age group that I am now becoming a full-fledged member of. And this was put out in a paper by Michael Hamlin and Odinikoff just a couple of years ago, and I thought it was really an interesting paper and something that people need to consider, because V-Light is going to be coming out with a device that can be put on the thymus. Well, it's out now. It's just out of stock. It's called the X Plus. And we've been providing those to people for about a year now, and getting really good results in terms of energy, people getting their energy back and reducing infection and overall improvement in immune health. So I think there's something to this idea of stimulating the thymus non-invasively with photobiomodulation in terms of immune function.
So just as a point, as you get older, your thymus gland is going to shrink. That's what you're saying, involution.
Yep.
So if you think about it, you get a double whammy if you put the pad or the sound, whatever piece here, because the bone marrow really in an older person is only available in the thin bones. It's not actually in the long bones, as the bone marrow stem cells in the thin. And one of the great places is the sternum.
Yep.
So if you put it over there, you're going to have photobiomodulation of the sternum, which is a thin bone, which is a good generator of stem cells, bone marrow stem cells. But then just right underneath that is the thymus that you can kind of, get a touch,
well,
theoretically get a touch on the thymus gland itself. Go ahead.
Right. And since we now know only recently that there's free-floating mitochondria in the blood, the more that you can stimulate the blood in and around the thymus, the better.
Mm-hmm.
Very good point. Very good point. Very good point. And then NF-kappa B activation is something that, we talked about. So I think this is very good to bring these points up, that the thymus is important in immune function. And it's already been shown that the PBM or light therapy can help this tissue.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are stem cells.
Then there's this is just a little list of papers that are about healing the lungs with photobiomodulation. So really we've just put this in. I mean, they're fairly recent papers just to show, although this is not directly COVID-19, this is just general support of lung function. So, you know, there's a lot of things, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, you know, effects of using light specifically on the lungs. And then looking at things like pro-inflammatory cytokines, you know, that's one of the things, you know, that's a major factor in COVID-19. So anything that's going to have a positive effect on that, we want to look at a little bit more seriously. Collagen deposition, you know, that's another thing that's kind of showing up. You have this collagen deposition, which builds up in the lungs, makes it harder to breathe. PBM improves functional capacity in chronic pulmonary disease. So again, that's one of the risk factors. So anything that we can do that kind of change the health of the lungs or these risk factors for the disease, again, is something that we need to be looking at. It's effective in acute lung injury. So yeah, these are just some papers that are published that are already looking at how can we support lung function using red light therapy.
And these are 6 very good references that were touched on. I don't believe all of them have been touched on, but I mean, when we, you know, reviewing the literature, just, you know, whipping through, we're focused on brain, we focus on body, but some people are doing this research on lung. And if you think about it, we talk about, you know, therapeutically, you have to time this, you know, the right way, depending on, you know, dose and everything like that. But we talked about, okay, so I'm recovered from the virus now, I'm healthy, but I may have fibrosis of my lungs, which means something that really doesn't get better. So when is the optimum time to intervene? And now at least perhaps we have some sort of intervention for this, you know, this is going to be a chronic lung disease problem for how many millions of people? I'm not so sure. What do you think, Marvin?
I think it's going to be around for as long as you, Sarah, and I are around. And I think we're going to have to face it as an issue of both aging and also people who are engaged in, you know, lifestyle behaviors like smoking that are now, you know, going to be compounding the problems that they're going to be facing going forward.
I just wanted to throw out one research from France that said that the smokers had less complications of the COVID infection, just to throw that out there. Go ahead.
There's some kind of thing with nicotinamide or nicotine. Yes. There's some kind of advantage with nicotine, isn't there? Because I saw somewhere that they were recommending patches, obviously not smoking, but maybe it's the nicotine in the smoking that conferred the advantage.
Or maybe it's the same oxidative stress that you're giving to the lungs that gives it a chance to pump up, you know? You're giving it a small stress and it can react and combat it. So maybe it has this inflammatory response that's going, you know, by itself. You know what I mean? So it's primed, perhaps. As we're thinking about the treatment, that's another thing too. Priming the system.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, you know, having been involved in clinical work in psychology for a long time with a body-mind orientation, my first thought about people who are smoking is that they're actually activating their diaphragms more and breathing more deeply into their lungs and getting their lungs to move more. And also that the nicotine is also going to work as an anxiolytic. It's going to calm people down. Yeah,
stress is a big factor.
But you know what? It's still bad for you and you shouldn't do it. And I don't care what the French people came up with about it.
That's what they drink a lot of wine too. So
yeah, that's true. All right. Well, in any event.
Yes, stem cells. There's a lot in the media and in the research about stem cell and stem cell therapy and how this is, you know, one of the things. And we did a quick search before we came on here and found over 20 companies that are now looking at using stem cells as a way of treating and preventing COVID-19. So it's very interesting area. There's Lund University in Sweden that have developed specific stem cells to treat inflammation of the lungs, and they're ploughing forward with their research. It's interesting to me because stem cells are one of the things that respond to light, and particularly red and near-infrared light. And it has been shown in many papers that red light and near-infrared light can stimulate not only the proliferation of stem cells, but the migration and, how well they survive in a certain area. So to me, this may be a good place to explore where you can have these two therapies together, have some kind of stem cell therapy along with photobiomodulation to improve the efficacy of that therapy.
I agree.
Yeah. Melatonin is something we looked at again because melatonin, it's this hormone, but it's produced in response to red light and near-infrared light, and photobiomodulation can help with the production of it. And we saw already, about stem cells being introduced in the thymus, but it's also in all kinds of body tissues. It's very anti-inflammatory, and it modulates mitochondrial homeostasis, which again is very interesting because it seems like the mitochondria are becoming more and more implicated in the kind of etiology and progression of a lot of these illnesses. So melatonin seems to play maybe a bigger role than was first thought in things like this virus. And interestingly enough, it seems like melatonin you can have a lot of melatonin when you're younger, and it kind of diminishes the more you age. And if you look at the graph of melatonin production to COVID, you'll see there's an inverse proportion. Very, very young children don't seem to have mortality or risk much from COVID-19, and that kind of, the older you get, the greater the risk. And it's kind of the inverse for melatonin, the older you get, the less you have. So there does seem to be some kind of protective element from...
Well, and I think Sarah and I have talked about Jack Cruz's work, and he's made a very big point out of the fact that people who get morning sunshine develop melatonin and produce melatonin more than if they don't. And I know for a fact that I spent a lot more time outside in the morning sun when I was younger, and that most of the people who are living in assisted living facilities and nursing homes are getting little to no early morning sunshine.
Correct.
Yeah.
So the light, this is one of the factors that they said, the light itself is helpful. And, because you are stimulating some melatonin activity, by the sun itself. So but perhaps this is the link. The sun doesn't go, the sun goes in your eyes and it goes on your skin, right?
Right.
So, I mean, there must be a mechanism of how this helps. So I believe that this is most likely one of the players in this light versus COVID.
Absolutely.
Oh, definitely. And I think there's I'll just go back, there's the whole piece of setting the circadian biology there. Because, everything is obviously interlinked in the body. And if your circadian biology is right, you have these clock genes, in your head that are setting like you see, these little clocks that go over the whole body. If you're out of sync with that, of course, your body finds it harder to fight off infections because your body's not doing the right thing at the right time. Your body has a time to heal and repair. And it does that at night. And if you haven't kind of set your body up so that your body knows those cues for day and night, then I think that's one of the things that may make you more vulnerable, is that your circadian biology is off and you are not as resilient as you would be. And melatonin, I think, is probably one of the key cues for the body to set that up.
Good call.
Yeah. And then this is the other thing about cytokines. Melatonin also seems to be very much involved in the production of these cytokines. And we've seen in COVID-19 that, it seems that cytokines can play two roles. The body kind of has them as a defense, but then it gets to a point where, you have these cytokine storms and then it becomes counterproductive. So I think really the reason why this is so important for things like looking at photobiomodulation is that red light and sunlight, but of course red light also, if you're in a clinical setting, it has a notable increase in serum melatonin levels, which has this impact on cytokines and inflammasomes and all of those things that seem to be playing a massive role in the worsening of the condition and quite how bad you have it.
How about the melatonin to inhibit NLRP3 inflammasomes and sepsis conditions? That's a very good reference. And in the rodent models, combined treatment of melatonin and mitochondria significantly attenuate progression of ARDS. Very, very good. And irritation with red light leads to a notable increase in serum melatonin levels.
Yeah.
Light's good for the body.
Yeah, you can see how the case for kind of using photobiomodulation, or at least with some of these other things, it's definitely something that needs to be explored for this condition because of all these things we're seeing. And also nitric oxide seems to play a big part in COVID. And of course, nitric oxide is one of the things which is very, very well documented as being released when you expose the body to red and near infrared light. It's something that happens when you have that activation of the respiratory chain. You have production of nitric oxide. I mean, things like they're finding, if you have a lot more nitric oxide, especially in your nasal passages, it protects against bacteria and viruses, which made me think about, like the Viola or those other little devices, red light devices that go up your nose where, seems very sensible. Why not make sure you have enough nitric oxide there? Again, it goes back to the furin expression that Marvin was talking about. That seems to be one of the ways that the virus gets into the cell in the first place. It accesses by this furin enzyme. So yes, nitric oxide seems to play a huge part. And again, that's something that we've known for a long time, is produced in the body when you subject it to red light.
And probably the infrared also. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm saying red light. When I say red light, I mean red and near infrared. It's just a shorthand. But yes, you're right. Anything in that red spectrum from whatever that is, 600 up to 1200 nanometers. This is your research proposal, Marvin.
We might have
we lost Marvin?
Might have had a technical difficulty there, but what they're looking at is their proposal that they're working in the lab is the evaluate 810 and 1068 pulsed photobiomodulation on the innate immune time course. So what they're saying is that they're looking at the NF-kappa B and this stat NOS and TNF alpha, which was gone into quite detail with our speakers. So these viruses responded well to photobiomodulation. They were destroyed by photobiomodulation, especially this wavelength. And what they're going to do is they propose both an animal model and a human model of these treatments daily. I guess they're looking at 5 treatments of 10 minutes exposure for up to 4 weeks. I don't think that, and then followed by a live virus test. And this is what they're proposing for the labs to just examine this, to figure out at what phase, a little bit about the timing, a little bit about the wavelength, and giving us some target measures. And it was proposed that that TNF alpha might be an important biomarker throughout these phases. So you can kind of get an idea of a speedometer of the immune system, if you will. So that we have to kind of figure out when to put on the gas and when to put on the brake on this photobiomodulation. So the exposure and the wavelength, all these things have to be worked out. And all these targets, should be measured in all the proposed research projects so that we can understand, this is what we're trying to work on. And then we put all the different parameters like time and dose and wavelength and everything like that. So we'll see how these parameters change. That's, I think, an excellent proposal on a global level. So if every center internationally was working on light versus COVID, and we had the similar type of targets to shoot for, we would be able to evaluate one against the other with the same target. Pretty ingenious, huh?
Mm-hmm.
So we could run multi-center research on this across the globe because everybody's got the COVID and everybody's got different lights all across the globe. So why don't we check it out and use some of the biomarkers like TNF alpha and F kappa B, NF kappa B, these sort of things to see how the results are. You follow? That makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, and Marvin's got this online. We can add this as a link maybe, but this is all kind of detailed out, and he's got this in a very clear proposal with quiet mind, and yeah, we can share that.
Great.
Yeah. Study with the flex beam, like I say, this is the flex beam device. We were talking, you know, about kind of stages of using it and whether you can use it at home to treat yourself. And also, you know, we want to look at prevention as well as cure. And we also want to look at post, you know, recovery. So there's all those things that we're looking at. I mean, with Recharge, we're kind of looking at using it in conjunction with some of these other things. And we're trying to do a project now with stem cells and hyperbaric oxygen. So that's where we're at with that.
I think that's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just to summarize, you know, it does seem that photobiomodulation has this huge potential to reduce the impact of COVID-19. So, you know, we might not be talking about cure here, but what we're talking about is very much, you know, helping people to deal with it. Like you say, giving people the tools to use something in their own home, take responsibility for their own health, to improve their own health outcomes, and maybe even do some preventative. It's very inexpensive compared to, you know, pharmaceuticals. You know, you buy your device and there you go. Non-toxic, non-invasive, very easy, and boosts the immune system. So really, you know, this is something that not only might help against that illness, but will also build up your resilience to other things that are coming. So yes, that's kind of our summary of why wouldn't we use red light? Why would we not start looking at these technologies now?
And one of the things is that, you know, many of the technologies, you know, you think about it, what else can you purchase to use at home? You know, maybe a treadmill, you know, and it doesn't have that, I don't think it has the amount of research on that, on the, you know, this sort of things that we're talking about. But yes, as a home care protocols, I think that photobiomodulation, as well as, you know, the lifestyle things that we talked about, are going to be so key in helping us in this pandemic and, you know, maybe the next one, right? So I thank you for your participation. And remember, you know, we're saying that we're all in this together. And I appreciate you and Dr. Berman's input because it's extremely valuable to our to this not only to the summit but the people's health. Do you have any further send off that you would like to tell the attendees?
No, I think we've covered it. I'll just say thank you, Joe, for pulling it together. I think this is what we need right now, is information sharing and just taking a common sense view of things and just exploring all avenues. You know, that's what science is about as well. Direct observation, using it on yourself, doing your own self-experiments, and yes, and just being open-minded to the fact that, you know, there is something outside of pharmaceuticals that we can do at this time, maybe in conjunction with. So yes, well done to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a bunch. Thanks a bunch. Let's keep it going.